Hi everyone, welcome to my presentation. My name is Lucy, and the topic of today's presentation is food insecure households' self-reported perceptions of food labels, product attributes, and consumption behaviours. Just a quick definition to start. So there are many definitions of both food security and food insecurity, but this is the definition I've chosen today. Food insecurity is whenever the availability of nutritionally adequate and safe foods or the ability to acquire acceptable food in socially acceptable ways is limited or uncertain. Often, the image we have of food insecurity is a person in a developed nation experiencing hunger and starvation, which is the severest form. However, in Australia, the focus is more about getting enough nutritionally adequate food as well as having enough food to meet caloric requirements. Additionally, if a person is stealing food, we do not consider this a socially acceptable way of accessing food, and therefore this person is also considered food insecure. Food security, like many public health concerns, is complex and has multiple levels of influence. The Food and Agricultural Organization describes 4 pillars that support household food security. These are availability, access, stability, and utilization. For a household to be food secure, all 4 of these pillars must be in place and can't be undermined. Within each of these pillars are determinants of food security. The icons on this picture indicate the determinants that I've found within my research, the most well known being income. That is, if a person's income is inadequate and they cannot afford food, this will undermine the access pillar and that household will become food insecure. For this presentation, we'll be looking at determinants that fit into 3 of the 4 pillars: access, availability, and utilization. We won't be touching on the stability pillar until the very end of the presentation when we talk about some implications for practice. Just an overview of the issue in Australia. So about 1 in 20 Australians are thought to be food insecure when using the National Australian Bureau of Statistics results. However, we do know that particular groups are vulnerable to food insecurity. These include tertiary students, Indigenous people living in regional areas, although all people living in regional areas are thought to be at heightened risk, those who are unemployed, renters, and Indigenous people. With the development of the COVID-19 pandemic, we expect that the number of people experiencing food insecurity is likely to rise as unemployment increases and the number of people who are socially isolated from their networks or who cannot access food at the shops increases. The methodology of this study centered around an online survey that was administered at the end of 2014 and the beginning of 2015. The online survey was completed by 1,056 participants. These participants were aged between 18 and 84 years old, were required to be the main grocery shopper in the household, and were required to reside in one of 5 Australian states. These were New South Wales, Victoria, WA, South Australia, and Queensland. As the survey was administered online, internet access was necessary for inclusion in the study. Quotas were set to ensure that there was sufficient representation in terms of gender, age groups, and location. Quotas were linked to Australian Bureau of Statistics results around the Australian general population. The online survey included the short form of the US Household Food Security Survey module, which I'll talk more about later in the presentation, as well as 12 sociodemographic indicators. These were things like age, gender, household structure, etc., 28 food label and product attribute questions, and lastly, 19 consumption questions that were based off the 2013 dietary guidelines. All results were taken from Qualtrics and imported into SPSS, where they were initially analysed using crosstabs and then finally entered into a logistics regression module that controlled for factors such as education and income. The US Household Food Security Survey module was included in our online survey as an indicator of food security status. This module has been extensively validated and utilized both in the US and internationally. There is a long version that includes 18 questions and a short form that has 6 questions. We selected the short form to minimize respondent burden. The short form can correctly identify approximately 98% of individuals when compared to the longer version. The short form identifies or classifies people into 3 groups. These are very low, low, and high marginal food security. So based on the classifications from the US Household Food Security Survey module, this is what we would expect that households in each of the classifications to experience. So high marginal households would have no anxiety about accessing food, while those in the low food security group would have reduced quality, variety, and desirability of diet, but no reduction in quantity, while those in the very low group would have intermittent disruptions to eating patterns and reductions in food intake of 1 or more household members. For the purpose of this research, we're going to consider households in the low and very low groups to be food insecure. The majority of the respondents in our online survey were classified into the high marginal group, 63%. This was followed by 20% in the low food security group and 17% in the very low food security group. So approximately 37% or a third of our respondents had some degree of food insecurity. Food insecure respondents in this study were less likely to be influenced by product nutrition information, to find information on food labels useful, or to understand the information on the back of the pack. What we weren't able to definitively ascertain in this study was whether food insecure people are less influenced by product nutrition information because they genuinely don't understand it, or whether their food choices are limited by factors such as income, and therefore nutrition content isn't a deciding factor in purchasing behaviors, or whether it's attributed to a combination of factors. Certainly more research is warranted in this area. Food insecure respondents in this study were more likely to value organic, convenience, generic, and supermarket branded products. Both convenience and supermarket branded products have previously been found to be favored by food insecure people. Supermarket branded products are generally found to be cheaper and are therefore desirable to people on low incomes. Convenience products are desirable to food insecure people who potentially have very busy lifestyles and are time poor. Organic products may have been favored by food insecure people in this study because they were perceived to be a healthier option. This was not explored in this part of the research. However, in qualitative focus groups conducted with food insecure people, we found that organic products were perceived to be healthier and therefore more desirable. Food insecure respondents in this study reported lower consumptions of water, vegetables not including potatoes and pasta, and higher consumption of fruit juice. When asked to rate how healthy their diets were, food insecure participants were twice as likely to rate their diet as unhealthy when compared to their food secure counterparts. Based on the findings of this research and others, here are some implications for practice. Health professionals should advocate for further subsidies and the maintenance of the GST exemption on fruit and vegetables. This is because low vegetable intake has been shown in this study and in others in food insecure populations. However, we know from previous research that when the cost of vegetables is subsidized, the consumption of these products increases in low-income households. Therefore, further subsidies on vegetables may incentivize food insecure households to improve their intakes of these foods. We know that low income is a principal driver of food insecurity, and that households that are reliant on welfare payments are unable to eat in accordance with dietary guidelines due to income limitations. Therefore, health professionals should advocate for an increase in governmental welfare payments, and this may ultimately translate to improvements in food security status and in dietary intake. In Australia, we've not had a national nutrition plan since 1992. While in recent years there have been steps to try and update this plan, these have not come to fruition. It is vital in this country that we have an updated national food and nutrition plan that has goals, steps, and timelines assigned to addressing food insecurity. Lastly, provision of increased food literacy education, focusing on the identification of cost-effective and convenience food, could potentially assist those experiencing mild forms of food insecurity. However, health professionals should be sensitive to those experiencing food insecurity and recognize that there are environmental determinants that individuals are unable to overcome on their own. If you're interested in finding out more about this research, it has been published in Nutrients. I'd like to acknowledge the participants. Without their valuable insights, this research wouldn't be possible. I'd also like to thank my PhD supervisors and co-authors for their support and assistance in writing this publication. Thank you.